Hello all. Today we'll be discussing an important concept in C++ related to exceptions, particularly null reference exceptions. Therefore, we might have already seen many null reference exceptions during our development journey. Therefore, it can be quite intimidating means when these exceptions occur and try to find out the root cause of the exceptions which are coming up. Therefore, here we'll be discussing about we will be just writing some code and trying to demonstrate in which situation this null reference exception comes up and in which situation it doesn't. Normally, the common cause of reference exception is whenever a pointer is null and when we try to access something using that null pointer, the null reference exceptions comes. For example, in this particular code, we see that there is a class pointer called project p which is initialized to null, and we are trying to call an API using that particular null pointer, and we can see that we are calling this particular API using this null pointer, and our obvious thought is this will cause a null reference exception. Therefore, we will just try to run the code and try to see whether this really cause a null reference exception or not. We just try to start debugging, and we see that the as expected we got a null reference exception. This was null pointer. This pointer was null pointer. And let's try to see another situation. We try to switch back to the code, and we will try to actually call another API called show. We'll try to call this particular show API, and we'll try to rebuild this particular project. Build this particular project. Yeah, once this is built, we'll try to debug this particular start debugging. And as you can see, this successfully exited with exit code 0. That means it was successful, and the output is also printed in the console that my project, which was in the as part of the show API. So as we can see, still we are using this null pointer, and we are calling the API using using this null pointer. And even though we are using a null pointer, it didn't throw any exception. So why is that? So why this particular API call didn't throw a null reference exception in the first place? So let's try to analyze this two APIs, and try to understand what is going inside these individual APIs. For first API that we try to invoke is this show my project API, where we are trying to print this uh, particular string, and this particular member variable we are trying to print. Therefore, this particular member variable is stored inside this particular project, and we are trying to print this particular member variable. So we can actually this gets when we compile this particular project, this gets translated to this my name. Therefore, this is what this particular thing is. So when we try to access some member variable using the this pointer and try to print something in the console, what happens is when we try to call this particular API, show my project. Therefore, the runtime knows what this API definition is, where it resides. Therefore, it actually goes ahead and try to particularly invoke this particular API, and the invocation will be successful. And as a first argument for this particular API, this pointer will be passed. And what is this pointer which will be passed, which is a calling object pointer. Therefore, here this pointer is null pointer. And whenever we try to print something and we are trying to access this pointer inside this API, so since this pointer is null, it will throw an exception. Since we are trying to access something using this null pointer, that's where the exception comes. For in this particular API, we are not doing anything with this pointer. Whatever this pointer is getting passed to this particular function, we are not doing anything particular. We are not accessing this pointer. That is why this particular function doesn't throw any exception, even though we are using the null project pointer here. Therefore, this binding happens, and the runtime is able to resolve which API to call during runtime. But this pointer, since this pointer is null, whatever we are trying to access in the second version of the show API, this will throw an exception. So that's how it is actually. This is where an particular null pointer exception comes. Therefore, this is particularly important to understand. Normally, what we understand is whenever we just try when we try to see some pointer is null and we are trying to directly call some API using the null pointer, we immediately feel that the null exception comes from this particular line. But the actual null reference exception comes from this particular line, since we are accessing this pointer here. So that's it I want to cover in this video. There is a blog post for this particular video. I will just pin it in the comment section, and do share your thoughts in the comment section, and do share this video link with your friends, and do not forget to subscribe this particular channel. See you again in next video.